The air in central Texas in June of 1936 was a physical presence, a thick, wet heat that clung to the skin and turned the simple act of breathing into a conscious effort. Max Hahn and his wife, Emma, were not seasoned hikers. They were simply escaping the confines of their small home in London, seeking a sliver of shade and the illusion of a breeze along the scrubby banks of Red Creek. It was during this meandering walk, more a flight from boredom than a purposeful exploration, that Emma pointed to a loose rock ledge, weathered by millennia of flash floods and searing sun. A peculiar piece of stone, about the size of a large loaf of bread, had detached from the ledge and lay half buried in the creek bed's gravel. What drew her eye was not the rock itself, but the incongruous piece of wood protruding from it, bleached pale by the sun and strangely smooth. Max, a man of practical curiosities, waded into the shallow, warm water and heaved the concretion out of the mud. It was heavy, dense with limestone and chert. The piece of wood was clearly a handle, its end fractured and splintered, but its main body was locked impossibly deep within the stone. It suggested a tool, but a tool trapped in a manner that defied simple explanation. They took the stone home, adding it to a small collection of other geological oddities they kept on their porch. For 10 years, it served as little more than a peculiar doorstop, a conversation piece for the rare visitor. The wood continued to weather, but the rock held its secret fast. It was not until 1947 that their son, George, grew tired of the mystery. He took a hammer and chisel to the concretion, intending to free the tool from its stone prison. The limestone was stubborn, but it eventually cracked and fell away in dusty, gray chunks. What emerged left them staring in silence. It was a hammer, not a petrified relic or a crude stone implement, but a hammer of a design familiar to any carpenter or blacksmith of the late 19th or early 20th century. The head was a claw hammer style, made of a dark, non-rusting iron alloy, its striking face showing faint signs of wear. The wooden handle, now fully revealed, was partially carbonized at the point where it entered the hammer's eye, yet solid and intact for most of its length. The object was a paradox. A modern tool, of a type one could buy from a mail-order catalog, had been found embedded in rock that local geologists identified as belonging to the Edwards Plateau, part of a Cretaceous limestone formation over 100 million years old. The initial confusion was quiet and localized. The Hans were not scientists and had no platform from which to announce their impossible discovery. They showed it to friends, to local rock hounds, and the story remained a piece of regional folklore. The scientific community, when it caught wind of the object, was summarily dismissive. The explanation was obvious, they argued. A miner or a fence mender in the 19th century had lost his hammer. It fell into a fissure or a muddy slump. Over decades, not millions of years, mineral-rich water percolated around the tool, dissolving carbonates from the surrounding limestone and redepositing them in a process of rapid concretion. The resulting nodule, hard and dense, would perfectly mimic ancient stone to the untrained eye. It was a geological curio, nothing more. A simple case of mistaken context. The hammer was not old, the rock around it was merely new. This explanation, so neat and rational, should have been the end of the story. The London hammer, as it came to be called, should have faded into obscurity, but it did not. In the early 1980s, the artifact was acquired by Carl Baugh, a creationist who saw in it not a geological anomaly, but a profound challenge to the entire timeline of evolutionary science and geology. He made it the centerpiece of his Creation Evidences Museum in Glen Rose, Texas. Here, the hammer began its second life. It was no longer a lost tool, but a sacred relic, proof that the geologic column was a fallacy, and that man had walked the earth alongside the creatures of the Paleozoic seas. Baugh commissioned a series of tests, the results of which only deepened the mystery for his followers. A test at the Battelle Laboratory, a respected metallurgical facility, reportedly found that the hammer's head was composed of a strange alloy: 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. This composition was baffling. Chlorine is not used in modern iron smelting, as it makes the metal brittle. Furthermore, the metal showed an unusual resistance to corrosion, having remained almost rust-free for the decades since its discovery. The story grew with each telling. The handle, once thought to be simple pine or ash, was now claimed to have been analyzed and found to possess a preternatural density. The hammer sat in its glass case, a silent rebuke to conventional history, championed by believers and ignored or derided by the mainstream. For decades, it existed in this intellectual limbo, a subject for late-night radio shows and fringe documentaries, while the world of empirical science moved on, confident in its explanation of a misplaced tool in a fast-forming rock. The lost years were quiet, dusty, and defined by the gentle hum of the museum's fluorescent lights. 0:130 hours, U.S. Space Surveillance Network, Vandenberg Space Force Base. The signal was almost dismissed as noise. It was a faint, intermittent whisper of electromagnetic radiation originating from a nondescript patch of Somervell County, Texas. It was picked up by KH-11 Kennan 18, a surveillance satellite on a low Earth orbit pass designed to sniff out the electronic signatures of clandestine nuclear programs. The signal was weak, barely distinguishable from the background cosmic microwave radiation, but it had one characteristic that set off a cascade of automated alerts. It was perfectly, unnaturally coherent. It pulsed with the regularity of an atomic clock, a tiny, rhythmic heartbeat of energy that did not match any known terrestrial or celestial source. Cross-referencing the location with ground-based assets produced an immediate, almost comical mismatch. The source was not a military base, not a research facility, not even a power station. It was a small, privately owned building just off Highway 67, the Creation Evidences Museum. 2 days later, a black van with federal plates pulled into the museum's gravel parking lot. The men and women who stepped out were not dressed as FBI agents or military personnel. They wore the unassuming attire of university academics and federal estate appraisers. They presented Carl Baugh's successor with a warrant signed by a judge from a court so obscure it barely seemed real. The warrant did not authorize a seizure. It authorized an acquisition under the Antiquities Act, citing national historic and scientific interest. The price offered was generous, and the alternative was not. By dawn, the London hammer, along with the remains of its original concretion, was sealed in a vibration-dampened transport case, flying east on an unmarked C-130 Hercules. Its destination was a place that did not officially exist. Site 4, a subterranean research facility buried deep in the granite bedrock beneath the Virginia foothills. 0900 hours. Site 4, Materials Analysis Wing. Dr. Eris Thorne despised paradoxes. His world was one of numbers, of immutable physical laws, and the predictable behavior of crystalline structures under stress. As the lead metallurgist at Site 4, his job was to take the unexplainable and make it explainable, to reduce mystery to a chemical formula. The object on the examination table in front of him, cradled in a non-reactive polymer mount, was an affront to his professional sensibilities. He ran a gloved hand over the hammer's dark, strangely smooth head. "So," he said, his voice flat and devoid of wonder, "this is it, the great challenge to Darwinism. Looks like a 20-cent railroad hammer." Across the table, Dr. Evelyn Reed gave a small, delighted smile. She was a quantum physicist whose official title was Theoretical Applied Science, a deliberately vague label for a woman who spent her career on the bleeding edge of the impossible. Where Thorne saw a lump of iron, she saw a knot in the fabric of space-time. Don't be so dismissive, Eris. Provenance is everything. A 20-cent hammer found in a Walmart is clutter. A 20-cent hammer found inside a 400-million-year-old rock is a conversation with eternity. It's a conversation with a 19th-century miner who was clumsy, Thorne retorted, turning to his console. The concretion story holds up. Rapid mineral deposition. Case closed. We're wasting taxpayer money. Standing by the reinforced door, Major Eva Rostova shifted her weight. She was the facility's security chief, a woman whose entire being was oriented around protocol and threat assessment. The taxpayers are not our concern, Dr. Thorne. The signal is. That object is emitting a coherent, low-frequency EM field. We need to know why. Is it a power source, a transmitter, or is it just a freakishly radioactive piece of iron? Thorne sighed and keyed in the first sequence for the mass spectrometer. Let's find out what it's made of. The old Battelle report mentioned chlorine and sulfur. I expect to find high-carbon steel with slag inclusions consistent with 19th-century smelting techniques. A robotic arm, delicate as a surgeon's scalpel, extended from the ceiling. A high-intensity laser focused on a microscopic point on the hammer's head, vaporizing a near-zero mass sample and drawing the resulting gas into the analysis chamber. The process was silent, precise, and utterly routine. Thorne leaned back in his chair, expecting the results to appear on his screen in a matter of minutes, confirming his hypothesis and allowing him to move on to more important work. He was a rational man, a man of science, and he believed the world followed rational rules. The first numbers that appeared on the screen made him lean forward again, frowning. The primary component was iron, as expected. But the trace elements were wrong. There was no carbon, not a trace. A steel hammer without carbon was not a hammer. It was a piece of soft, useless iron. Contamination in the sample, he muttered, running the test again. He ablated a second sample from a different spot. The results were identical. No carbon. What is it? Reed asked, her voice alight with curiosity. It's nothing, Thorne said, his frustration growing. The machine needs recalibration. It's not detecting carbon, and the isotopic ratios for the iron are drifting. He pointed to a string of data on the screen. Look at this. Iron 56 is the most common isotope, should be about 91.7%. The reading here is 88.2%, and the balance isn't in iron 54 or 57, it's in iron 60. Reed stepped closer, her eyes wide. Eris, iron 60 is a radioactive isotope. It has a half-life of 2.6 million years. Any primordial iron 60 in the solar system decayed billions of years ago. The only way to get it is from a supernova. Or a faulty sensor, Thorne snapped, typing furiously. I'm running a full diagnostic. Rostova stepped away from the door. Doctor, translate. Is it dangerous? It's impossible, Thorne said, his voice dropping. He stared at the screen, at the numbers that refused to make sense. The machine finished its diagnostic. A single line of green text appeared at the bottom of the display, all sensors operating within nominal parameters. He ran the test a third time. The results were the same. No carbon, an impossible percentage of iron 60, and the chlorine and sulfur were there, just as the old report claimed, but they were not alloyed with the iron. The spectrometer showed them existing in a state of quantum superposition, their atomic structures simultaneously bound to and separate from the iron lattice. It was not a glitch. Thorne felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He was looking at a material that could not exist, a metal forged in a star that had died only a few million years ago, somehow shaped into a common tool and left in the Texas dirt. He looked from the screen to the hammer, sitting placidly under the sterile lights. It was no longer a historical curiosity. It was a violation. "Okay, Evie," he said slowly, his earlier condescension gone, replaced by a thread of pure scientific dread. "Let's talk about your knot in space-time." 1400 hours, the observation deck. The analysis chamber was a sealed room of sterile white walls and gleaming steel, viewed through a triple-paned sheet of reinforced polylaminate glass. Inside, the hammer rested alone on its pedestal. Thorne, Reed, and Rostova stood on the other side, watching. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a tense, focused energy. Thorne had spent the last 2 hours running every non-invasive scan in his arsenal. Gamma-ray spectroscopy, neutron activation analysis, thermal imaging. Each test returned a fresh impossibility. "The thermal signature is flat," Thorne said, gesturing to a monitor displaying a heat map of the hammer. The image was a uniform, cool blue. "It's at ambient room temperature, 20.0 degrees Celsius. Perfectly. It doesn't absorb or radiate heat. It's like a thermal black hole." "A state of perfect equilibrium," Reed murmured, her fingers steepled in front of her. "It's not that it's cold, Aris. It's that it's stable, unnaturally so. What about the EM field Rostova mentioned?" "That's the strangest part." Thorne brought up another display, showing a complex wave pattern. "It's not a field generated by the hammer. It's a field being nullified. The ambient electromagnetic noise in this room, from the lights, the computers, our own damn heartbeats, it all just stops within 5 millimeters of the hammer's surface. The field we detected from orbit wasn't a transmission. It was the edge of a bubble of absolute electromagnetic silence. A shadow." Rostova crossed her arms. "So it's a stealth device." "No, it's more than that," Reed countered, her excitement palpable. "Stealth technology scatters or absorbs energy. This erases it. It's imposing its own set of physical laws on the space it occupies. It's not a piece of technology, it's a piece of physics." Thorne shook his head, running a hand through his already messy hair. He felt like a cartographer who had just discovered the edge of the world was not a cliff, but a waterfall into nothing. "The metallurgy is wrong, the thermodynamics are wrong, the electromagnetism is wrong. This isn't an out-of-place artifact, it's an out-of-place universe." He turned from the monitors and looked at Reed, his skepticism finally, utterly broken. "You were right. This is something else." "But what?" "Let's find out," Reed said, her eyes gleaming. "It's been passive until now. Let's see what happens when we give it a push." "What kind of push?" Rostova asked, her hand instinctively moving closer to the sidearm holstered at her hip. "A gentle one," Reed assured her. "I want to introduce a focused energy source, a low-power microwave emitter. We'll aim it at the hammer and modulate the frequency. We're not trying to blast it, we're trying to talk to it." Thorne hesitated. Every instinct he had as a materials scientist screamed that this was a bad idea. You do not apply energy to an unknown, unstable system. But the system was already impossible. The old rules no longer applied. "All right," he said, turning to the control panel. "But we start low. 1 watt. I want every sensor in this facility focused on that chamber. If anything fluctuates, pressure, temperature, radiation, I'm cutting the power." "Agreed," Rostova said, her gaze fixed on the hammer. "And my fingers on the containment alarm. The second this thing does anything other than sit there, the room is flooded with fire-suppressant foam and sealed by a 2-ton titanium blast door." Reed just smiled, as if they were discussing the weather. "It won't be necessary. It's been waiting." Thorne engaged the microwave emitter. A small, articulated dish descended from the ceiling of the test chamber, aiming a precise beam of energy at the hammer's head. On the monitor, a graph showed the power output. A steady 1-watt stream at 2.45 gigahertz. For a full minute, nothing happened. The hammer remained inert. The thermal signature was flat. The bubble of electromagnetic silence held firm. "See?" Thorne said, a touch of relief in his voice. "Nothing." "Wait," Reed whispered, pointing at a different screen, one displaying the output from a quantum tunneling microscope aimed at the air molecules surrounding the artifact. "Look at the wave pattern." Thorne zoomed in on the display. The random, chaotic dance of nitrogen and oxygen atoms was organizing. The molecules were aligning themselves, their quantum spins synchronizing in a cascade of eerie precision. They were forming patterns, complex geometric shapes that resolved and dissolved in the space of nanoseconds. It was like watching frost form on a window pane, but the frost was made of reality itself. "It's not a glitch," Thorne breathed. The lights in the observation deck flickered, once, twice, then died. The emergency power kicked in a second later, bathing the room in a harsh red glow. An alarm began to blare, a high, piercing tone. "What was that?" Rostova demanded, her hand now firmly on her weapon. "Power surge," Thorne said, his hands flying across the keyboard. "The emitter is drawing. My God, it's pulling 50 megawatts from the grid. It's bypassing every regulator, every circuit breaker. It's draining the facility's main reactor." "Shut it down!" Rostova yelled. "I can't," Thorne shouted back. "The controls are locked out. The hammer, it's not absorbing the energy. It's using the emitter as a conduit, pulling power directly from the source." Inside, the chamber. The air around the hammer began to shimmer, like a heat haze on a summer road. The patterns being drawn in the air molecules were no longer fleeting. They were stabilizing, resolving into lines of what looked like code, symbols and equations that were alien, yet possessed an undeniable internal logic, were hanging in the air, glowing with a faint blue light. "The containment has been breached." "It's writing something," Reed said, her voice filled not with fear, but with profound, terrifying awe. "It's rewriting the local environment at a quantum level. It's not a tool, Eris. It's a terminal." The ontological shock hit Thorne with the force of a physical blow. He was a man who understood the world through the lens of physics, and he was watching physics being calmly, methodically, and purposefully dismantled. The hammer was not an artifact from the past. It was a machine. And it had just turned on. The sterile white room was no longer a laboratory. It was a cage, and the bars were beginning to dissolve. 2100 hours. Site 4, Command Center. The command center was a tiered amphitheater of monitors and workstations, a concrete bunker designed to survive a direct nuclear strike. Now it was a hive of controlled panic. The main reactor was offline, hemorrhaging power into the analysis chamber. The facility was running on emergency generators, and every screen showed a cascade of red warnings. Thorne, Reed, and Rostova stood at the central console, the focal point of the chaos. "The power draw is stabilizing," a technician reported, his voice tight. "But it's holding at 90% of the reactor's maximum output. We have 60 minutes of fuel for the backup generators before the whole site goes dark." "What about containment?" Rostova asked, her focus narrowed to the immediate threat. "Are the blast doors holding?" "The doors are holding, Major," another technician replied. "But we're getting anomalous sensor readings from inside. The pressure is fluctuating, the temperature is dropping, and there's a chronoton particle spike that, well, that shouldn't be possible." Reed ignored them all. Her eyes were fixed on the main monitor, which showed a live feed from inside the chamber. The air was no longer shimmering. It was filled with solid-looking projections, lines of alien script, rotating three-dimensional star charts, and complex schematics hung in the air around the hammer like a ghostly blueprint. "It's not just writing, it's displaying," she said, her voice a hushed whisper. "It's a log file, a diagnostic report." Thorne moved to her side, his scientific mind reasserting itself over the primal fear. He had to understand. Can you make sense of any of it? The mathematics are transcendental, Reed said, pointing to a swirling vortex of equations. But the language seems to be based on universal constants. Planck length, the fine structure constant, the speed of light. It's a language of pure physics. It's not meant to be read. It's meant to be computed. She began typing into a terminal, routing the visual data through a translation matrix of her own design. I'm trying to find a Rosetta Stone, a key. For several minutes, the only sound was the clicking of keys and the hum of overworked cooling fans. Then, a block of the alien script on the screen flickered and resolved into English. The font was a simple, sans serif block text. Diagnostic log, Unit 734. Tool class, temporal stabilizer, Mark IV hammer. Deployment time, 408 to 1.133 standard years, ref on origin. Target, Ordovician Silurian geologic boundary. Thorne read the words, and the last vestiges of his old reality crumbled to dust. The hammer wasn't from the past. It wasn't even from their present. 408 million years, he read aloud, his voice barely audible. Silurian period. That's when the rock was from. It wasn't found in the rock, Reed corrected him, her expression one of dawning, horrified comprehension. It made the rock. The concretion, it was a byproduct of its primary function, a shell of rapidly aged and mineralized sediment created by the energy discharge. More text appeared on the screen, the translation algorithm now working faster. Mission, Repair Class 3 Causality Fracture. Event ID, K443 Gamma. Cause, Unauthorized chronoton particle influx. Anomalous biological event. Summary, a localized reality shear caused by the premature extinction of a keystone marine species. Left uncorrected, the fracture would have cascaded, leading to the non-emergence of terrestrial vertebrate life and the eventual nullification of the primary timeline. Rostova stared at the screen. What the hell does that mean? Anomalous biological event? It means something happened back then, in the ocean, Thorne explained, the pieces clicking into place with a sickening finality. Something that wasn't supposed to. Something died when it shouldn't have, and the ripple effect was about to wipe out our entire evolutionary history before it even started. So this Unit 734 was sent back to fix it, Reed finished. It's a repair tool. A temporal technician dropped his hammer. The sheer cosmic banality of it was staggering. The greatest mystery in human history, the object that had confounded scientists and fueled decades of debate, was a piece of lost equipment. Repair protocol. Initiated. Method, focused reality stabilization. A single targeted strike to collapse the fracture. Result, success. Timeline integrity restored to 99.8%. Warning, residual fracture. Instability detected. Warning, power cell depleted during repair. Unit entering low-power hibernation mode. Recovery beacon active. The signal we detected, Rostova said. The recovery beacon. It's been broadcasting that signal for 400 million years, Thorne said, a wave of vertigo washing over him, waiting for a pickup that never came. Until we hit it with a microwave. Beam, Reed added. We didn't talk to it. We jump-started it. We gave it just enough power to wake up and finish its diagnostic. A new line of text flashed on the screen, blinking in bright, urgent red. Critical alert. External power source detected. Unit attempting to complete repair. Warning. Residual fracture is unstable. Continued power draw is exacerbating local space-time stress. Projected outcome. Catastrophic decoherence. Reality drift imminent. As if on cue, a technician across the room yelled, "Sirs, we're getting phasing." He pointed at his monitor, where the image of a coffee cup sitting on his desk was flickering, rapidly alternating between being full and empty. Another technician shouted that the digital clock on his wall was running backward. The air in the command center grew cold, and a low, discordant hum vibrated through the floor. The reality drift had begun. The hammer wasn't just a tool from the future. It was a wound in time, and they had just torn it open. Its log file wasn't a message. It was a warning. And the danger wasn't just to them or to the facility. The danger was to the very structure of the present moment. They were standing at the epicenter of a timeline that was beginning to unravel. "We have to cut the power," Rostova stated, her voice regaining its command authority. She turned to the chief engineer. "Can you sever the main conduit from the reactor?" "Not without a manual override at the reactor core itself," the engineer replied, his face pale. "And that's a 10-minute job, assuming the corridor hasn't, phased out of existence." "It wouldn't matter," Reed interjected, her focus still locked on the stream of data flowing from the chamber. "The connection is established. Cutting the power now would be like trying to stop a lightning bolt by unplugging the toaster. The energy potential is already there. It would discharge catastrophically." The humming intensified. Thorne watched in disbelief as the edge of the console in front of him became transparent for a split second, revealing the wiring and support struts within before snapping back into solidity. The smell of ozone and burnt sugar filled the air. A reality drift was not a clean, cinematic effect. It was a messy, nauseating process, a fundamental breakdown of the rules that held the world together. Cause and effect were becoming suggestions. "The log," Thorne said, forcing his mind to focus through the growing disorientation. "It said the original repair was a single targeted strike. What does that mean?" Reed's fingers flew across her keyboard. "It's a resonance event. The hammer's alloy isn't just for durability, it's a tunable material. The technician would have used an external device to make it resonate at a specific frequency, the inverse of the fracture's frequency. It's like noise-canceling headphones for space-time. The two waves cancel each other out, and the tear seals itself." "But the hammer's power cell is dead," Rostova pointed out, "and we don't have the temporal tuning fork, or whatever it's called." "We have something better," Thorne said, a desperate idea forming in his mind. He pointed at the power draw readings on his monitor. "It's pulling power from our reactor, but it's not a constant stream. Look at the pattern. It's modulating the flow, trying to create its own resonance." Reed saw it instantly. "It's trying to tune the reactor's output. But our reactor is a fission plant. It's too crude, too noisy. It's like trying to play a violin with a chainsaw. The feedback is what's tearing us apart." "So we help it," Thorne declared. "We can't shut it down, but maybe we can give it what it wants. We can't replicate the original device, but we can refine the power feed. We can use the facility's capacitor banks to smooth out the energy flow and help it find the right frequency." Rostova stared at him as if he were insane. "You want to give it more power? Your expert opinion is to point the fire hose at the drowning man?" "My expert opinion, Major, is that we're already underwater," Thorne shot back, the adrenaline cutting through his fear. "Protocol isn't going to work here. We can either try to fight a 400-million-year-old piece of future technology that's rewriting physics around us, or we can try to help it finish its job so it shuts down. Reed, can you isolate the target frequency from the log data?" Reed was already working. "I think so. It's elegant. It's based on the decay rate of the iron-60 isotope within the hammer itself. The hammer's its own tuning fork. It just needs a clean power source to strike it." She looked up, her expression grim. "But Eris, the energy requirement to sustain that resonance, even for a microsecond, is astronomical. It will take everything the main capacitors have. It will cause a full-site blackout and probably fuse every piece of electronics in a 5-mile radius. It's a one-way street. If it doesn't work..." "Then we've just accelerated the end of the world," Rostova finished for her, "while the alternative is to sit here and watch it happen in slow motion. Concrete and foam are looking better and better." Thorne looked at Rostova, then at Reed. The pragmatist, the soldier, the believer. 3 worldviews in a room that was ceasing to be a room. For his entire life, he had trusted in procedure, in observable facts, in the slow, steady accumulation of evidence. But the evidence was telling him to take a leap of faith. The choice was clear, and it was terrible. Hide behind protocol and wait for the inevitable, or take a wild, desperate gamble on a theory extrapolated from a ghost in the machine. He made the decision. "Reed, find that frequency," he ordered. "Rostova, I need you to get everyone non-essential to the surface evacuation points. Now, engineer, you're with me. We're rerouting the primary capacitor banks to the analysis chamber. We're going to play its tune." The climax was not a battle. It was a desperate act of engineering. Thorne and the chief engineer worked frantically at a manual power distribution node, wrestling with heavy, sparking conduits. In the command center, Reed shouted out a string of numbers, the frequency harmonics she had extracted from the hammer's log. Rostova, after a moment of tense hesitation, had followed her orders, her voice crackling over the intercom system, directing the evacuation with cold, efficient professionalism. The reality drift was worsening. The corridor to the power node flickered, and for 3 terrifying seconds, Thorne saw not concrete walls but a primeval shoreline under a violet sky, the air thick with the smell of brine and decay. He slammed the final conduit into place, just as the scene snapped back to the sterile gray of the facility. "Capacitors are charged and linked," he yelled into his radio. "Ready on your mark, Reed!" "The drift is accelerating," Reed's voice came back, strained. "The hammer is reaching a critical resonance cascade. You have to do it now, Eris. The frequency is locked." Thorne looked at the engineer, who gave him a grim, terrified nod. He took a deep breath and slammed his hand down on the large, red discharge button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then every light in the facility went out, plunging them into absolute, suffocating darkness. The emergency generators, already drained, gave a final groan and died. The all-encompassing hum of the reality drift stopped, replaced by a profound silence that was more terrifying than the noise had been. A single, pure, bell-like tone echoed through the structure, a note of impossible clarity that seemed to vibrate not in the air, but in the bones of their skulls. In the analysis chamber, the floating glyphs and schematics collapsed into a single point of blinding white light centered on the hammer. The light held for an instant, sucking all energy and sound into itself, and then it was gone. Silence. Minutes passed. A backup battery on Thorne's radio crackled to life. "Thorne? Eris, are you there?" It was Rostova. "I'm here," he croaked, his throat raw. "Status? Power is out across the entire grid, but it's stable. The phasing has stopped. The clocks are running forward again." There was a pause. "The chamber feed is dead, obviously. What did you see?" Thorne fumbled for his emergency flashlight, its beam cutting a weak path through the darkness. "We saw the discharge. It's over." He and the engineer began the slow walk back to the command center, their footsteps echoing in the dead silence. When they finally reached the observation deck, prying open the doors that had locked shut during the blackout, they found Reed already there, her face illuminated by the screen of a battery-powered tablet. The feed from the chamber was back online, running on a local power pack. The image it showed was mundane. The chamber was intact. The emitter was retracted. And on the, pedestal, the hammer sat, looking exactly as it had before. "Is it done?" Thorne asked, not daring to hope. Reed nodded slowly, pointing to the readings on her tablet. "The EM shadow is gone. The thermal signature is normal. It's radiating a tiny amount of residual heat from the discharge. I'm reading its composition." She turned the tablet so he could see. The screen showed a simple spectrographic analysis. High-carbon steel. Trace amounts of manganese and silicon. A perfectly ordinary late 19th century alloy. The iron 60 was gone. The impossible chlorine and sulfur bonds were gone. It was just a hammer. The energy discharge didn't just seal the fracture, Thorne realized. It completed the hammer's purpose. It used up the last of its exotic properties. The future tech burned itself out, leaving behind the mundane object it was disguised as. Rostova came up behind them, her own flashlight beam sweeping across the room. "So it's over. What do we report?" The three of them stood in the darkness, the weight of their shared secret settling upon them. They were the only three people on Earth who knew that history was not a set course, but a fragile, repaired thing. That humanity's existence had been saved by a nameless technician from the future who had dropped his tool on the job. The choice was simple. They could tell the truth and shatter the foundations of every science, religion, and philosophy on the planet. They could unveil a future that humanity was nowhere near ready to comprehend. Or they could hide it. "We report," Rostova said, her voice low and firm, her gaze meeting Thorne's, "that the object was a unique form of naturally occurring radioactive meteorite with unusual electromagnetic properties. During testing, it proved to be unstable. It released its energy in a single, massive electromagnetic pulse, neutralizing itself and disabling the facility's power grid. The object is now inert and poses no further threat." Reed looked from the Major to Thorne, a flicker of disappointment in her eyes. The greatest discovery in human history, and they were going to bury it. But she nodded. She understood the necessity of it. Thorne looked at the hammer on the screen, the simple, harmless tool that had almost unmade the world. He had started the day as a skeptic, a man who believed only in what he could measure and prove. He was ending it as a witness, burdened with a truth that stretched from the dawn of life to a future he could not imagine. He nodded in agreement with Rostova. The cover-up was the only responsible choice. The world outside Site 4 would continue on, blissfully unaware of how close it had come to non-existence. The sun would rise. People would go to work. History would proceed along its repaired, slightly scarred timeline. The London hammer would be relegated to a footnote in a classified government report, a curiosity that had been explained away. But for Eris Thorne, everything had changed. He now understood that the laws of physics were not laws at all, but merely local ordinances. He knew that the past was not a dead and buried country, but a place that could be revisited and broken and fixed. He looked at his own hands, at the solid, dependable reality of the world around him, and saw it for what it was: a beautiful, improbable, and terrifying accident, held together by a single, well-aimed strike from a lost hammer 400 million years ago. History wasn't written in stone. It was hammered into shape.